Chapter 11. Naruto, Desert Flower. Time skip 3 days later. Sunagakure no Sato. Temari, Gaara and Kankuro walked in through the gates of the village, and saw the villagers going around, and a small bit of construction work going on near the buildings in the vicinity of the Kazekage Tower. Gaara and Kankuro stopped at the gate guards and checked in, seeing the ANBU there guarding it, and the ANBU couldn't be happier to see their Kage back. They saw Temari, and were about to stop her to tell her to check in, when they saw her expression, and the small amounts of killing intent she was leaking, and smartly stayed silent, making Kankuro snicker that the elite ANBU were scared of a furious Temari. Gaara and Kankuro followed her to the Suna hospital, and saw that there were many people outside waiting, and a lot of commotion around the gates. Suna Hospital. Temari came to the gates of the hospital, and saw that there were some people crowded at the gates fighting to go in to meet Naruto, and just kept walking silently as the scared civilians and shinobi alike promptly gave her a way to move forward. The ANBU guards guarding the gate moved away seeing the furious Kunoichi, and knew of her reputation when she was furious, and decided to play it safe, and let her go seeing Gaara and Kankuro following her silently, and gave them a curt nod who nodded back. She walked up to the reception, and saw the receptionist there stamping, and going through a lot of files, and spoke up. "Which room is Naruto Uzumaki in?" she asked in a low voice that had a dangerous edge to it which the receptionist didn't notice, and kept going through her work not glancing who she was talking to. "I have already told everyone Naruto-sama is not to have any visitors unless authorized by the council, now go, there is a lot of work to do," she said, stamping a paper, and Temari slammed her palm on the desk making the files fall, leaking a lot of killing intent, causing her to look startled to see who she had spoken to. "I will ask again, which room is Naruto Uzumaki in?" she spoke in a low tone, and the receptionist gulped seeing she would blow up any minute, and spoke up. "N Naruto-sama is N not to have any." She stuttered and tried to speak again when Gaara came to her from behind. "Let her pass, she has my authority, and the last I checked I am the Kazekage," he said, and the receptionist beamed at seeing him back, and nodded, signing a visiting card that she handed to Temari, who took it with a nod and moved to the secure wing of the hospital guarded by the ANBU for special and higher level shinobi. She walked through the wing and up the stairs to the 3rd floor followed by Gaara and Kankuro at a distance as she came to room 302 and saw Dragon himself standing there as he stood in her path blocking her entry. "I'm sorry Temari-sama, but no one can visit Naruto-sama, not even." He was cut off as she slapped the visiting card on his mask and pushed him aside as a snickering Kankuro and Gaara with an amused smile came up. "Well, so much for the respect for an ANBU commander in front of an angry Temari," said Kankuro laughing, and Gaara nodded as Dragon looked down embarrassed as he watched her slide the door open and go in, closing and locking it behind her. He too wasn't one to stop her entry from seeing her lover, as well as seeing her expression, but at least he tried. Gaara put a hand over his shoulder as he looked at his Kage, and came to his senses, kneeling down. "Kazekage-sama, you have returned," he said stoically, and Gaara nodded as he sat down on the waiting chairs with Kankuro waiting for Temari to be done so he could see him, if maybe he was alive by the time she was done with him. "Dragon, go and inform the council that I have returned and taken charge, and lift up the emergency protocol. I shall meet with the council at noon after I have met with Uzumaki," he said stoically, and Dragon nodded listening to his orders. "Dismissed," he said, and Dragon stood up and bowed to his leader. "Hi Kazekage-sama," he said, and vanished in thin air as Gaara and Kankuro gazed at the locked door with curiosity. "So how long do you think she will take?" asked Kankuro, still keeping his gaze at the door. "I have no idea," he said, also gazing at the door. "Will he be alive after she is done with him?" he asked again, and Gaara answered in his usual way. "I have no idea," he said, and Kankuro nodded. "I wish him peace in the afterlife, he was a good man," said Kankuro in a mourning voice. "Indeed he was, I'll miss him," said Gaara, and both went silent waiting for the screams to come if there would be any. Naruto's room. Naruto was sleeping and his body was dead tired. Apparently, from what the doctors and Chio told him, Sasori had come prepared to neutralize him, and the poison was slowing down his chakra healing and cutting off his demonic chakra, which wasn't allowing him to recover as quickly as he did, and was healing at a normal rate, which was really annoying to him. He was glad the bastard was dead, or otherwise he would have created even stronger poisons for him in the future. The little demonic chakra that was flowing in his chakra coils was keeping the poison at bay that Chio was taking care of, slowly and surely neutralizing it. She herself was surprised at skill of her grandson to create a poison strong enough to neutralize a Jinchuriki like this, cutting of his demonic chakra almost completely. If it had been any other Jinchuriki, he wouldn't have been able to stop the poison from spreading, but she had to admit the King of Demons was a well-earned title, as the Nine Tails was manipulating what little access he had to the boy to the limits. He hadn't felt this tired and drained ever in his life, and wondered if this was what severe chakra exhaustion felt like, and heard a little snort in the back of his mind, but shrugged it off, and went back to his deep slumber, letting the tiredness take over him. An hour later he heard the door sliding open, and it being shut and locked as he felt some chakra being pushed into the silencing seals of the room, seeing them glow, and woke up. This wasn't either Dragon or Chio, since they had no reason for privacy seals, and the little amounts of killing intent he felt made him cautious. A moment later, as his little senses that he had access to at the moment kicked in, he smiled. He located the beacon of the love of his life behind him, and knew who had done what was going on in the room, and opened his eyes and tried to sit up with great effort, and sat up leaning against the back of the bed, and sat up turning to Temari, breathing a bit heavily from the strain. Temari stood there, her knuckles clenched white in anger, and glowing on the inside in all her righteous fury, as she saw the blonde knucklehead that had taken away her sleep for the past 3 nights dozing off in a deep slumber, and her anger increased. She saw as his body moved, and she saw the strain with which she sat up, causing a bit of worry in her anger to rise up. She saw him sitting up against the support of the back of the bed, and sighing and breathing heavily at the effort it took, making more worry creep into her, replacing her anger. She saw him glance at her and saw his skin a bit paler than usual, and his tired eyes and expression, and her heart melted as she saw her hyperactive knucklehead in that condition, but she reminded herself she was still furious with the blonde, and her killing intent returned back as she concentrated it on him, and he looked at her curiously, not at all scared of her. That made her even more annoyed that he wasn't in the least bit of intimidated. Naruto saw his love standing there, and smiled tiredly at her, and was surprised as she was leaking killing intent, and that too was intended for him, as he tried to speak up, opening his mouth, but no words came and his throat hurt him. Damn, he shouldn't have shouted that loudly that night, he mused as he took up a glass of water slowly with tired shaky hands, and took a gulp of it slowly, and put it back slowly as a little water dropped from the shaking. Temari saw this, and seeing his shaking hands, and how he was having trouble speaking, her anger was again being released as worry was increasing again at the blonde. She cursed him for worrying her so damn much, but told herself that she was angry with him. She decided whatever he said first would be the deciding factor as to what she would do to the cute Arg knucklehead blonde. Her words died down in her throat that she was about to thrash him with as he opened his arms, motioning for her to come to his arms. "I missed you, Mari-chan," he whispered hoarsely in a tired voice, and her eyes watered as all her anger lay forgotten, and she threw herself in his arms, her eyes watering, seeing his weak and frail state. He was supposed to be always grinning and teasing her, not like this. He caught her in his arms and wrapped her up as he buried his face in her neck, taking in the scent of her lovely silky hair as he let it flow freely halfway down her waist, and let his fingers run through it, and held her tightly. Oh, how much he had missed his Haim, he thought, hugging her tightly as she started sobbing, and hitting his chest lightly. "Baka, I was supposed to be angry with you for being so damn reckless, and worrying me, and beat you up. I was supposed to punish you, but..." She stopped her rant in between her sobs as he pulled her head back, and captured her lips, running his hands on her waist softly, and licked her bottom lip softly as she opened her mouth, and he kissed her, pushing it in, and she massaged it with her own as it turned into a full-out make-out session lasting 15 minutes as he was more and more into it, listening to her soft moans, and kissed her jawline and neck, sensually making her moan. "Ah, Narukoan." She moaned as he pushed her kimono sideways, connecting his lips to her sweet spot, making her gasp as he ran his hands through the insides of her thighs and massaging them as he kept licking and kissing her sensitive spots softly and sensually, teasing her. She was on cloud nine as she felt him touch her after so long and take away all her worries and anger in him. She was getting wetter by the minute as she felt both his hands on her thighs, and her panties were now drenched. She was breathing heavily as he felt him on the edge her kimono near her breast, that was her most sensitive spot, and felt him lick it softly, making her back arch as pleasure rocked through her body. Naruto right there more, yes. She moaned as she pulled his head closer and tried to make him go lower to her breasts, but he removed her hands from his head and kept at the same place, not giving in as she didn't force him, and ran her fingers softly through his hair, and he smiled and kept at it as her chest heaved up and down, her breath heavy as she was so close. He slowly made his way up, kissing her softly on the neck, and reached her ear, pressing his lips and licking and blowing at it softly, making her shiver and clutch him closer to her. Yes, moan my name, Heim. He whispered softly and massaged her thighs softly and pressed his lips on her neck as her head thrashed a bit. No, I won't, I'm angry, she said with a moan, making him smile as he licked her collarbone and went to the spot from before and just touched his tongue as her chest moved up, trying to make him lick, but he leaned back, making her whine, and he again went her ear. You will say my name, Heim, he said sensually, and she shook her head violently from the pleasure, and he smiled, kissing her cheek softly, and went down as she tried to capture his lips. Say it, he whispered sensually, and she shook her head as he bit her neck softly, and she gasped as her stomach churned from the pleasure and pain. Naruto, I'm coming, she moaned, and he felt his hands drenched and brought them up and licked them up softly, and she blushed scarlet in embarrassment and hugged him tightly, stopping his teasing as he chuckled tiredly and closed his eyes, breathing heavily. She felt his breathing was harder than her own and remembered how much effort it took him to sit up, and to go through so much would have had a lot of strain, as she hugged him tightly to her as he laid his head on her chest and closed his eyes. Why did you do it if you were so tired, she whispered, running her fingers through his hair, and he smiled a bit as his breathing slowed down a bit, and he kissed her neck softly, burying his face in it. Because you were angry and worried and needed a release, Heim. And it was all because of me, I'm sorry I worried you, he whispered tiredly, and she smiled a small smile, kissing the top of his head softly as she whispered. It's all right, I know you can take care of yourself, but I worry too much, because I love you too much, Baka. Care about yourself more than me for once, she whispered, brushing his hair as he took in her scent and smiled. Never in a million years will I put myself before you, he whispered, and she smiled at her cute little blonde Baka. Why can't I ever stay mad at you for once, she said softly, and he smiled. Because you love me, Heim, he answered softly, and she giggled. Stop taking advantage or I might change my mind, she was speaking playfully as he pressed his lips on her and looked at her with a soul-piercing gaze, making her look at him in a trance. Never change your mind about loving me, Heim, that will be the day that I do something really reckless, he whispered in a dead serious voice, and she nodded and gave him a smile as she too pressed her lips on his softly and rubbed his whiskers. I won't. Ever, she whispered, and he smiled as he kept his forehead on hers, and both gazed at each other lovingly. I love you, she whispered, her arms wrapped around his neck the whole time they talked, and he smiled at her faint pink blush adorning her cheeks. And I love you, Heim, he whispered back as she brought his face to her neck, and he snuggled in her arms, making her smile. Sleep now, my blonde teddy, you need the rest, she whispered with a small melodic giggle, and he nodded in her neck. Now I can sleep peacefully, Heim. I missed being in your arms, he said softly, and she brushed his hair as his eyes drooped, and he yawned cutely from exhaustion, making her smile. And I missed holding my Baka in my arms, she whispered as she felt his breathing calm down, and the weakness overtook him as she too closed her eyes and cuddled up to him, letting the sleep claim her. 3 hours later, outside the room. They are not coming out or opening the room, are they? Asked Kankuro, his gaze still on the door, and Gaara answered. No, I don't think so. He said, still waiting to see the blonde, and he had tried to get in, but the room was sealed shut with seals, making only Temari or Naruto to open it as they both sighed. I still can't believe he got so many presents, said Kankuro, and Gaara nodded, seeing the pile of gifts that the ANBU had kept at the end of the hallway. And to annoy me further, most of them were from pretty girls, or those really chubby cute children, some of who called me different names. He said, his eye twitching at the popularity of the blonde, and how he didn't even care, and was crying anime tears on the inside, thinking what he would give to be so popular. Yes, the best were Freak Face, Cross-Dresser, Alien Giant Cat, Makeup Man, Doll Man. He was cut off as Kankuro shouted. All right, I get it already, damn it, he said, and Gaara smiled at riling up the man as he stood up and started walking down the hallways as he spoke up. Come Kankuro, it's time, let's meet the council and see what has happened in our absence and what needs to be done, he said seriously, and Kankuro nodded, falling in step with Gaara as they walked down to the Kazekage Tower. Kazekage Tower. Council chambers. The council sat down on the round table, murmuring to themselves happily as the ANBU guards that had come to inform them of the meeting also informed them that Gaara had returned, and they couldn't be happier. The room turned dead silent as the doors to the chambers opened, and in walked Gaara, followed by Kankuro and Dragon, as he took his seat and gave them a nod as they nodded back. It's great to have you back, Kazekage-sama, said one counselor, and he nodded. It's good to be back, honorable councilman. Now pleasantries can be done later, he said, and they all nodded as he turned to the Jounin commander. I tried to meet with Naruto myself, but apparently my sister, in all her righteous fury, has locked his room and sealed it shut, not allowing anyone access except her until she is done with him. So I ask you, Baki, what happened while I was out, he asked, and the Jounin commander nodded. Kazekage-sama, it was a normal evening, and the village was doing its normal routines when suddenly a man with a black cloak and red clouds came flying in on a bird, he said as Gaara cut him off. How did he breach the barrier without anyone, especially Naruto, noticing, he asked, and Baki nodded. Yes, Naruto-sama came to the same assessment, and I looked into it. There was a sleeper cell spy on the inside of our barrier team. The deactivation of the barrier a few days before you left was also the result of him betraying us, he said as the council was in an uproar, and Gaara nodded at the man and held his hand up, silencing them. I expected as much. So have you sniffed out the traitors? And how was he able to operate so freely without anyone noticing, he asked, and Baki nodded. Yes, apparently Kazekage-sama, the man was having a lot of help from the outside as well as from the inside from one of our elite Jounins. Both have been captured and are currently with the ANBU Corps of T&I, he said, and Gaara nodded, taking the file and went through the files of the two and motioned for him to go on as he noticed the sudden feeling of pride in his voice and the way the faces of all of them lit up. Yes, well, he started bombing the village with small clay bombs and headed towards the Kazekage Tower, where Kazekage-sama engaged him, he said as the events came back to his mind, and the power that Naruto emitted and the aura he held came to his mind, and he spoke up. Naruto-sama identified him as Deidara, and then another one came and was identified as Sasori, and then a fight ensued as he went toe-to-toe, matching everything they threw at him, all the while protecting us in the battle. But he was getting a bit overwhelmed when we distracted Deidara for a few moments and he and Sasori went one-on-one. The battle was going on to a standstill when Sasori used the variation of Chiyo-sama's puppetry technique, and instead of 10 he used the performance of 100 puppets that he admitted he used to take down a small village, he said, making Gaara's and Kankuro's eyes widen when they saw the expressions of glee on everyone's faces and raised an eyebrow. That is when Naruto-sama completely turned the tables on him. He threw 2 of his 4 kunai and used a strange jutsu to multiply them into 1,000 and rained it on the puppet army in the sky. Then he disappeared in a yellow flash as many more similar flashes lit up the sky, and in moments Sasori's army was annihilated, and he didn't even know when he was killed. It all happened in just a flash. He finished as he noticed every veteran shinobi's curious eyes were now on Gaara, who had his eyes closed and nodded. Kazekage-sama, I believe you aren't telling us something, since I see that I and many who have fought in the Third Great Shinobi World War recognize what Naruto-sama did, and if we are not mistaken then that was. He spoke as Gaara raised his hand and gave him a stern look silencing him, and sighed rubbing his temples. Well, I guess the cat is out of the bag now. It's time to reveal everything. He thought as he took out a paper and held it in front of him as everyone gazed at him curiously. This is Naruto's original registration ID form that was misplaced by me when he submitted it. He said, and they nodded, noticing the special emphasis on the word misplaced and the sarcastic tone he held. Naruto told me everything about him and asked me to keep certain points hidden for his and everyone that was close to him safe, but I guess there is no point in hiding anything now. So until I make it official, Naruto is not called Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, and is not the son of Kushina Uzumaki, the princess of Whirlpool, and Minato Namikaze, the Yellow Flash, and Yondaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato. He said as everyone was wide-eyed and most of their suspicions were confirmed as suddenly all hell broke loose. Why didn't you tell us? He really is of royal heritage. That is amazing. The Namikaze lineage lives, and that too in Suna. He really is the son of the Yellow Flash. He heard their shouts and sighed, rubbing his temples in frustration, as he leaked his killing intent, shutting them up. Silence, he roared, and everyone sat down and became silent as he spoke up. You all cannot talk about this for now until the moment the village is out of chaos, and I shall reveal it to the villagers then. I hereby take you under an oath of silence ordered by your Kazekage, to not talk about the Namikaze name until I reveal it. I do not want IWA or Kumo to be on our backs when we are rebuilding and sorting everything out. Let Naruto get back to strength and our security systems back online, and then we can reveal it to the village. He said, and they all nodded wholeheartedly with wide grins on their faces at hearing the words they so wanted to hear, and to think their hero was the son of such royal and powerful leaders. Kazekage-sama, then I propose Naruto-sama be put as clan head of the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans, and become a clan head, thereby joining the council after he turns 16 next week, giving him the required age to become a clan head as per the laws laid down by the Shodaime Kazekage. He said, and Gaara nodded with a smile and agreed, making them all smile. All right, now that that is over with, what else did that blonde idiot do while I was gone? He asked, and the whole council chuckled, and he too cracked a smile as Chio spoke up. Kazekage-sama, Naruto-sama has enrolled many civilian children into the academy and stamped their admission papers during his 5-day reign as Kazekage. There were 27 to be exact in 2 days. Apparently, the civilians and shinobi alike love him and his kind and compassionate nature, and the warmth he emits with the aura of power around him. They have requested him for many things that were wrong, and how some of the clans were abusing the small merchants by their power, and he took many steps regarding the treatment of small merchants and civilians, and was planning many other things, but the invasion happened before he could work them out any further. These are only a few that he had planned and was working on. She said, handing him a file, and his and Kankuro's eyebrows shot up in surprise as they went through the file. Wow, he really is a work machine. To think these are only a few he had in mind, said Kankuro, and Gaara nodded as they kept reading through it. Indeed, to think he has done so much in such a short amount of time, he said as Chio spoke up. Kazekage-sama, there is a proposal the council would like to make, if you don't mind, she said politely, and he raised an eyebrow and nodded, seeing their intrigued expressions. Since when did the council become so lively, he mused. We would like to offer Naruto-sama a new position, which gives him more power and standing in the village, seeing his great leadership skill and the way shinobi and civilian alike look up to him. After this fiasco, his popularity and influence is going through the roof, as I imagine you would have already noticed, she said, and Gaara nodded, remembering the gifts and the crowd outside the hospital, and cut her off as an idea formed in his head, and he smiled, and the whole council became silent, seeing the stoic Kaga smile. I have an idea, he said, and they looked at him curiously. From this day on, I propose Naruto as my military commander. He shall be my right-hand man, and in a position to order the ANBU as well as Jounin commander. He shall have the discretion to do as he pleases, and get it signed by me to make it official, and will keep a good watch over shinobi and civilians, seeing as they see him as a better option to turn to than me. He shall answer to me and me only, and will entail the authority to have many changes be made in the infrastructure of the village as long as me and the council concur with his decisions, and they benefit the village. All those who trust him enough to handle such an important position say hi, seeing as the power he will hold only a unanimous vote will. He was cut off as they spoke up. HAI, they said in unison at the same time, and he smiled and nodded, writing it down on a scroll, and passed it around as they signed and stamped it, and he rolled it, sealing it with the official Kazekage seal, and kept it in his robes. All right, from this day forward Naruto is the military commander of Sunagekure no Sato. Please make this decision known to the villagers, and let them know after he is up and about to go to him. If I am not there, or for some reason they do not wish to talk to me, then he can get the job done in my stead. He said, and they all nodded with a smile. And before I dismiss the council, what the hell is that huge lake in the middle of the desert right beside our village? He asked, and they all smiled. That was Deidara's last attack to wipe out half the village that Naruto-sama deflected there, and the heat was so much that it turned 100 meters of sand to glass where it exploded, and due to the heat it rained a bit there, filling it up. If we are to see now, it has become a natural lake, seeing as it is big enough to last a few months with the little amount of rain we get, said Ebizo, and he nodded with a smirk. Uzumaki, you really do have the devil's luck. A mere deflection by you causes a natural phenomenon, he thought, and nodded. Then the broke part of the village will be extended, and we will take that lake under our village walls, making it a new part, and extending our perimeter. With Naruto's skills in water manipulation, he can fill it up if it ever dries up again, and we can use the water to our advantage, and make our lands a bit more lively. Get the builders to cut out pathways across the village grounds, and let the water flow, brighten the dry lands a bit. He said, and they all smiled and nodded. To have water and a bit of greenery was always a dream of every villager, and Naruto could make it a reality. Then the village council is hereby dismissed. I believe that is enough for one meeting, he said, and they all chuckled and left. That blonde gaki really knows how to turn people to his side, said Kankuro, and he nodded with a smile as they walked to the hospital to see if Temari was up and about. That he does, said Gaara, and they walked away. Suna Hospital. Gaara and Kankuro walked towards his room, and Gaara tried the door, and to his surprise it was unlocked, and he glanced at Kankuro, who was equally surprised, and slid the door open, and walked in followed by Kankuro. They stepped in to see the damage to the room, but found none, and were surprised as they stopped dead in their tracks when they saw the scene at the bed. Temari was leaning on an elbow with Naruto's head buried in her chest, as she was brushing his hair softly, and he was snuggled in her chest and completely cuddled up to her. She had a bright smile on her face as she saw the peacefully sleeping blonde she held in her arms. She didn't even notice them come in when she heard a shout. How the hell does he do that? Shouted Kankuro in disbelief as Temari leaked her killing intent at him, and a moment later her fan buried itself in his face, and he was on the ground rolling in pain. This is a hospital, you idiot, can't you see Naruto is sleeping? Keep it down, she hissed in a low voice, and he grumbled, rubbing his head, and stood up as Naruto moved a bit from the commotion, and Temari brought his tightly to her chest and kissed the top of his head. SHH, sleep Naruto, it's nothing, rest all right, she whispered softly as he snuggled into her, making her smile, and his breathing again softened as he went to a deep sleep, and Gaara took a seat at the couch, and Kankuro sat beside him, both with smiles as they saw their sister holding Naruto like a plushy bear. I thought you were going to beat him up and introduce him to a whole new world of pain with your fan, Kankuro said, reciting her words, and she smiled a small smile, cradling the head her lover softly and gently. I can't hurt him, Kankuro, no matter how angry I am. I love my idiot too much, she said softly, and both smiled genuinely at the love and affection in her voice, and the caring gaze she kept at the sleeping blonde. Then what was the fury you held for 3 days? Asked Gaara, still a bit slow on the feelings department, and she smiled. I was worried about him, but now that I have him safe in my arms, I can rest easy. She said softly, and he nodded with a smile and motioned for Kankuro to come, and they left the room, giving the couple the privacy they needed. Get better soon, Naruto. I miss your energy and teasing already. She thought, and herself went to sleep, cuddling to him as Gaara closed the door slowly, and smiled as he took one last glance at the cuddled couple and closed the door shut.
Alright, guys, that's gonna be part 11 of What If Naruto Was Abandoned by the Leaf and then taken in by the sand. Thank you guys so much for all of the support on all of my videos. It's crazy to me how fast I'm growing. Um, yeah, just thank you guys so much. This is crazy to me. But I'm gonna upload again tonight for sure. And see you guys in the next part of this.